Hello there, I'm Brian Goulet of gouletpens.com, and I'm here for the 53rd episode of Goulet Q&A, where I take all kinds of random questions that you have about fountain pens and whatnots. Today is a very special day, and I'll tell you why, because I've been asked many times before, why haven't you turned Goulet Q&A into an audio podcast? Well, I'm now proud to say that we are officially making this an audio podcast, available on iTunes and all your other podcasting players. So you can, from here on out, start hearing all of them. And we also went retroactively and turned all of the previous Goulet Q&As, extracted the audio out of them, and published them onto a new feed of Goulet Q&A. So you can go on iTunes, look up Goulet Q&A. You can, we got a direct link in all the blog posts now so that you can plug the RSS into whatever your podcast, application of choice is. So it's pretty cool that we were able to do that. Jenny definitely helped me out tremendously with that. She's my videographer here and helps me with all kinds of just random research things. Honest to goodness, the reason I haven't set up a podcast for, this until now is because it was a nightmare. It's surprisingly confusing how to set up this podcast, and it's really interesting. And I'm sure like some of you who are more technically savvy are going to email me now and be like, oh, well, Brian, all you had to do is this. And I'll be like, that's the thing I was missing all this time. No, but anyway, so what happened was Jenny and I went to set this thing up. Everything is all good, like from here going forward as far as release dates and title descriptions and stuff like that. However, going retroactively and trying to set proper release dates for things that we've actually already done turned out to be kind of a nightmare. So if you're looking at iTunes and a lot of other applications, the release dates for the first 52 episodes are going to be all freaking over the place and it's going to look terrible. But just go by the episode number. That should be in order. And then from here on out, from the 53rd episode moving forward, as we're publishing it, the release dates should be just fine. But they're kind of screwy, and I'm sorry about that. There really wasn't anything we could do about that. We tried like every single possible thing, but because of the way that we have it set up and structured and everything, we literally just can't get to the part of the code that we need to make those changes. So sorry about that. It's gonna be a little confusing, but from here on out, we'll be good. So that's kind of cool. Audio podcast, Goulet Q&A, all right. Also, I just want to give a quick shout out here to, I guess, myself. I'm using my own personal Twitter handle a lot now. I'm really starting to kind of get Twitter. I've been on it for like 5 years with, Goulet Pens, and we got a really solid following there, doing a lot of stuff. Alex helps me out managing that during the day, and Rachel and I kind of tackle it at night and weekend and stuff like that. But even still, I've never it's never really sunk in with me. But recently I've started to oh yeah, this is really awesome. Like starting to really kind of grasp how I can use Twitter really well. And I'm just really kind of digging it personally. So if you want, you can hit me up on my personal Twitter feed. It's at Brian Goulet _. Somebody snagged Brian Goulet plain. So I had to throw an underscore on the back end of that. But at Brian Goulet _, hit me up on Twitter. I'm more than happy to tweet with you whenever I'm free. I'm kind of on it all the time now, even throughout the day and whatnot. So I will try to be a lot more active on there. Been engaging with some people, done some really cool stuff on there so far. So it's really neat. I'm just really enjoying that, getting into it a little bit more. Had a lot of new products that are coming in or will be coming in soon. First thing I've got is Pilot Vanishing Point 2014. This is their limited edition that they come out with every year. This one is copper. Really kind of cool. I plan to do a video on this. It's going to release probably next week, but it's got a neat kind of a box, really kind of like a jewelry box look to it with like a little magnetic enclosure. It's got this cool little tray that slides out of the bottom that holds the instructions and the cartridge and whatnot. And then the pen itself kind of rests in the box, all nice and it's got this really cool kind of copper look to it. And I know I've been getting some questions about is this thing gonna tarnish or patina or whatever, and I don't think it's a real copper. I'm pretty sure it's just like a copper colored finish. So I think you're gonna be fine there, but been getting some good questions about that. People have been buying them. They're limited edition. They only make 2,014 of them. So every year they come out with it, they only make the number of them worldwide for that year. So mine is number 1741 here, so I'll add that to my annual collection of Pilot pens, but I'll explain that a little bit more in a separate video. I just wanted to let you know we've got them now, they're here, and we got a pretty decent stock, so you should be able to get them for a little bit. Also wanted to give an update on Stormy Gray, the new Jerbon 1670 color that came out that was literally here for an hour. It was kind of insane. They were here for an hour. We sold them all and we shipped them all out that day. So literally they were in our building for less than 6 hours. It was kind of insane. But anyway, we are still going to be waiting for those. We're told now it's going to be early December before we get more, which I want to basically flip out because so many people want this ink and it's crazy. It's an awesome ink, but you know, what are we going to do? We just can't get the stock, you know? So I'm talking to some people at Exclair to try to see what we can do, but you know, if they don't make it, we don't have it. So that's a little frustrating. I'm really sorry for you. You know, everybody's out of this ink. You'd be lucky to find it anywhere. You know, if you are able to find any of it, grab it now. And then this is kind of cool. I haven't really talked about this yet. This has been in the works for a little bit. Might seem a little bit out of the blue, and I'm not going to go into great detail about it. I'm going to be talking about it a lot more soon, but I do want to just let you know that Omos, which is a brand we haven't really done a lot with, aside from, you know, their ink, we haven't really done anything with their pens, except for a few special orders here and there. But Omos is coming out with the Ogiva Alba, which is these 3 colored demonstrator, piston fill, 18 karat nib, just really nice pens, ebonite feeds, all that. They write really well. We're actually going to have this pen as an exclusive for a little bit. So I'm going to be talking about these more. I'm not going to explain them too much here. I'm totally just teasing you now. They're not even on the website yet. We're going to get them up soon. I'm still getting the nib sizes finalized. They have a huge range. I think they have like 12 different nib options, which is just too many. So the pen is going to be $495, which sounds like a lot to some of you. For Omos pens, cotton resin, you know, all those features, it's really pretty phenomenal. They really haven't done a lot kind of down that low. So it's really an awesome opportunity for us. They're excited about some of the pictures and stuff that we're going to take, and I feel like we're going to be able to really do justice for this pen. So I'm gonna talk a lot more about that, but I just want to let you know that's coming. It's probably going to be about 2 weeks or so before I actually have those pens in. Right now we're working on pictures, video, that kind of stuff to get prepped for that. We're going to have it up on our website here probably in the next few days. I just need to get confirmation of those nib sizes, then we'll have them up. Also, the Lamy Studio Wild Reuben is going to be coming out really soon. That is still probably a couple of weeks away, so I don't exactly know when that's coming, but it's coming. And then, let's see here, Stipula is coming out with the Stipula Splash very soon. We should have that pen probably in the next week, maybe 2 weeks. That is going to be a cool pen. So $79 list price. I think we're going to have it for $64. Piston fill, flex steel nib, demonstrator. It's really cool, and Stipula hasn't done anything that I'm aware of in that low of a price range too. So I'm really digging the fact that companies, these like kind of boutique, like established companies, are recognizing that like they got to come down a little bit and get some newer people into their stuff so that they can kind of experience these higher end brands. So that's really cool that they're doing this. I'm really glad to kind of be involved in some of this stuff. So that's about all I want to shout out to as far as products now. There's actually a ton of other new stuff that's going to be coming out, but I don't want to bombard you with too much at once. Your wallet is going to be hurting this holiday season because there's a lot of really cool things coming out. Okay, so for questions for this week, I got a whole bunch of them, a lot of really good ones. I'm going to go ahead and talk through them. I got 17 of them lined up. I don't know if I'll have time to get through all of them. I got about, 55 minutes or so, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how I do. I'm going to keep on going. So, all right. First question I have is from Matt J. in an email. And Matt said, I have made note of your particular dislike of cartridges as opposed to bottled ink. While selection and variety are surely arguments for choosing the bottle, I'm curious to know if there are any technical or experiential differences to speak of. All right, that's a good question. Definitely my bias against cartridges, as convenient as they can be at times, my bias is definitely mainly for color selection and cost effectiveness. Cartridges, a pack of cartridges might be cheaper than a bottle of ink, but it's a significantly smaller volume of ink that you're buying in those cartridge forms. So you're paying like multitudes more to get your ink in cartridge form than you are in bottles. And if you use your pens a lot, you're really going to feel that. But if you're not using it nearly as much, I want to say it's something like 12 times more expensive to use cartridges than bottles. I know, I did the math a couple of Q&As ago. Can't remember exactly what it came out to. It's going to depend on the brand too, but You know, it's somewhere around there. So it's pretty significant. But anyway, so that definitely has more to do with it. And then especially if you're looking at, you know, proprietary ink cartridges like Lamy or Pilot or, you know, some of those other ones, Parker, you know, or that kind of stuff, Aurora, your ink selection is very limited compared to, you know, 600, 700, 800 different bottle types out there. So that's mainly my beef with it, but you're asking me a little deeper, Matt. So talking about technical experiential differences, the ink itself, okay, for pretty much for most that I'm aware, for just about every company that's making their ink in cartridge and bottle form, the ink itself is the same in the two. So you're not getting any different experience as far as the ink goes. As far as the delivery system goes, okay, if you're comparing a cartridge to a bottle, then really you're talking about cartridge converter pens, okay? So you're comparing the cartridge container to the converter container. That's the essence of what we're getting to with your question. The one caveat, the one little difference could be if you're using a pen that's a cartridge converter that can be converted to an eyedropper, that can change things because the cartridge is a little small. The body of the pen itself acts as kind of an insulator around the cartridge to protect the pen from the hand, from the heat that comes from your hand, whereas an eyedropper, if you're converting the whole body of the pen, the heat from your hand goes directly onto the pen, can heat up the inside. If your ink level is really low, you have a lot of air inside that pen, it can cause blobbing and increased flow because the heat from your hand is increasing the pressure inside your pen if there's a lot of air in there and can force more ink out. So that's one thing that can happen with eyedropper pens. It's not like an exclusive kind of, you know, blanket statement that can be made about all eyedroppers. It's just more of a tendency that eyedropper pens tend to have when you're using them in that way. But if you are really getting down to it, it's mainly a cartridge versus a converter. And most cartridges and converters are not that drastically different from each other. The one exception that I can kind of think of is I know Pilot, before they started putting in the little agitator, the little metal agitator in their converters, their Con 50 converters, it used to hang up kind of in the back of that thing. And people would often use the cartridge and just refill them with a syringe or whatever as an alternative to using the Con 50 so that they did not have those kind of flow issues. Has to do with the way the Con 50 converter kind of steps down when it fits onto the pen. The cartridge does not do that. The cartridge is kind of straight and then actually flares out a little bit as it attaches to the pen. So it can flow a little better there. Really hasn't been as much of an issue with the pens since they put in the agitator, which was probably 2 years ago, I want to say. Has it been that long? Wow. But anyway, so the main difference you're going to get there is the ink capacity is going to be greater with the cartridge on that Pilot than it would be on the Con 50. So that's kind of some of the only differences. Some cartridges you can get a little bit more ink capacity in them. You know, if you have a standard international pen and you can get a standard international long cartridge, you're going to get a lot more ink capacity than you would with a converter. Because a converter, you get back half of that converter, you got the mechanism and the part that twists and all that. Whereas if you have the cartridge, you can make that whole thing ink because it's just an empty container that's holding ink. So, but as far as the performance of the ink through the pen, generally, there's not that noticeable of a significant difference. Some of you may disagree with me on that, and there may be certain like circumstances where it might differ a little bit, but in general, I would say that pretty much the reason for using cartridges is purely for the convenience of just being able to carry them with you and pop them in when you need to use more. That's about the only difference. Melissa R. on Facebook said, so there have been a few quick selling items recently. You noticed. I'm wondering, in the history of Goulet pens, what item has been the fastest to sell out? That's an awesome question. I totally dig that. I had to think back about this one a little bit, and I think I need to have a little bit of a disclaimer here to say a lot of it is going to depend on the timeline within our Goulet history here as to what's happened, because sometimes we sell out of things really quickly because there's a lot of demand and we just do a poor job, frankly, of ordering the correct amount, or we order a lot and only get a small selection. So a lot of it has to do, I mean, basically everything is supply and demand, right? Obviously, that's economics right there. But for us, probably I'm going to tweak your question just a little bit here, Melissa, to say what has been kind of the most, like the highest demand, most dramatic release that we've had. And there are a few of them. It's kind of hard for me to directly compare. The Stormy Gray that we just got in was pretty ridiculous, not the most extreme that we've ever had. The TWSBI pens, historically, whenever they come out with a new TWSBI thing, we usually are kind of limited on our stock and they sell out very quickly. That happens a lot. The new Noodlers Naponset that's going to come out, guarantee you people are going to freak when that thing comes out. We're not going to get very many of them and they're going to be gone really fast. But probably the most dramatic situations we've had in the past were in some of our earlier days of the company when we were still kind of figuring things out. We didn't have like a huge following. We had kind of a little bit of a loyal customer base. We weren't as widely known back 3 or 4 years ago like we are today. But definitely some of the first releases we had of the Jeroboam Rouge Hematite, when those came out, that was kind of, we were like very green back then. We'd been in business maybe 6 months when that ink first came out. Sold out almost immediately, and it was like 4 months before we got more ink in. It was so long in between shipments. It was crazy. And then when we would get it back in, it would be gone immediately. I mean, you can look back through Ink Nouveau on the blog posts and you can see, just go look up 1670 and just kind of browse through some of those old posts. You can see we literally had to like do a blog post ahead of time to say, okay, we're gonna release it at noon on this day, and it's, you know, for first come, first serve, because it would literally be like, people would be freaking out so much. We would have to sell it at a specific time just so that we could manage the logistics. And that was fine. We were still really small then, so it wasn't as dramatic. But what really started to go crazy was when the Noodlers Flex pens first started to come out. This would have been probably, gosh, 3.5, close to, no, was it 4 years ago? No, it was about 3 years ago, I think. No, wait, sorry, I'm trying to remember all this stuff. It was about 3 years ago. That's when the Ahabs came out. So it was actually even longer than that. Wow, man. So yeah, it was like 3.5 years ago when the Noodlers Flex pens first started to come out. And it was crazy because there would be, you know, I think the first batch of Flex pens that we had, it was the Nib Creeper Flex pen. It was one color. It was, oh gosh, what was the color? The gray and white one. I can't remember it now. Oh man. I'm really struggling to remember the exact color that it was. But anyway, we got like 20 pens in, 20, and that was it. And it would be 3 to 6 months in between batches. It was crazy just how limited they were. And people didn't know what they were, and people didn't know how to use Flex pens. And now we take it for granted because Noodlers literally has about 150 different Flex pens between the Nib Creeper, the Conrad, and the Ahab. But back then it was like completely unknown and new, and we were unknown. We weren't even really selling pens back then. We were just ink and paper. So the Noodlers pens really kind of put us on the map as far as pens go. But then, like, some of those subsequent batches, once people started to know about these pens and really wanted them, and there was a 4 to 6 month wait in between batches as they would come out, it would actually crash our site because there was so much traffic from people that wanted these pens. That was definitely the most dramatic. It was before we knew how much traffic to anticipate. Our daily traffic wasn't that significant, so our servers and stuff we had set up could more than handle what we would do. But on those days when we do a release, everybody would come at once. They'd be refreshing at the time we tried to do the time to release. And then we would try to put them in stock, but there'd be so much traffic on the site that we wouldn't be able to put it in stock at the right time, which means everybody would just freak out that much more and it would bog up the server even more. And then finally it would go in stock like 10 minutes later, and some people would be calling on the phone and they'd be emailing and they'd be tweeting and they would be just going nuts. It was really crazy. And it took us like several releases of those pens before we really kind of figured things out. We would call our web host ahead of time and say, hey, we've got this release that's coming. Can you move our server and give us a semi-dedicated thing so that we can handle all the traffic? And then we finally figured out, okay, for those huge release days, if we actually take the site down, put it in maintenance mode, then the refreshing doesn't affect anything. We can put it in stock and then come up right when the thing releases. And that fixed all those problems of the site getting overloaded. So we learned about that kind of stuff as we went on, but it was a really dramatic for like the first 8 months or so that we were getting Flex pens in. It was absolutely crazy because it was limited numbers that we would get, huge wait times in between, traffic on our site. We were still figuring things out. We are much more, we much more have it together now. So we don't have, I mean, it's still exciting when we get new stuff in, but it's not nearly the like dramatic, is our site gonna crash kind of experience like it was back in the early days. And honestly, like as crazy as it was, I still kind of miss those days a little bit just because it was so exciting to have something so huge that would crash our site. But you know, of course, obviously now it's better not to have our site crash when we release something. So we definitely want to keep it, you know, kind of going smoothly, but you know, still, I look back at that time, it was very nostalgic. You know, we were running the business out of our house at that time, and I remember Rachel and I sitting on the couch next to each other when we'd release, you know, something new, and just like, you know, Joseph would need to be fed, and we'd be trying to like hold him off while we're trying to release things, and stuff was crazy, and it was just, you know, it was just nuts. It was all just very fun memories kind of those experiences back then. But anyway, so really good question there, Melissa. I got really nostalgic on you there for a minute, so. Sorry, I just totally am not going to miss the last 3 questions now because I spent so much time on that one, but that's okay. I'm glad you guys like it. You can tell that I'm like really like reliving a lot of stuff here. Anyway, okay, back to real world. Okay, Mike M in an email said, I've been into fountain pens and calligraphy for about a year now, and I'm also an engineering student and have recently caught the attention of Rhodia proposing them to develop an engineer's paper pad that takes well to fountain pen inks. I would love to see this product come to life, and perhaps Goulet Pens could carry it at some point. Here's a link to the blog from Rhodia. Okay, and I included the link on the blog for that. It was something, I forget exactly when the blog post came out. Do I still have it pulled up? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Yeah, okay, I do. So they posted it on, not long ago, a couple days ago, I think. So yeah, like mid-October, whatever. They don't have an exact date on their post. Rhodia Drive doesn't. So, but the first, oh yeah, okay, October 13th, 2014. So this was just a few days ago. But anyway, so basically, there's not a lot I can do. I know I've talked to Exaclair before about Rhodia or Clairefontaine doing custom pads. They are open to doing that, but the minimum quantities are pretty large to be able to do that. So for something like an engineered pad or something like that, it can be done, but, and I'm sure Rhodia wouldn't have even posted about it had they not been open to the idea. However, there needs to be a significant demand so that they know that people will actually buy them if they make them, you know? So I would say if you're interested, go head on over to Rhodia Drive from their post from October 13th entitled, Who Would Like to See Fountain Pen Friendly Rhodia Engineering Paper? Pretty self-explanatory post title there. But let them know, post in the comments, you know, shoot them an email sales@exaclair.com or whatever, and just see, you know, if you can get your opinion in there. If you would like to see a Rhodia pad with an engineering, you know, it's like a square grid with outlines. I think it's printed, the lines are printed on the back so that the front is blank. I don't know. So Mike was explaining all that, and it's in the blog post too as to what this engineering paper is. But I know a lot of people who are into fountain pens are pretty technical. You know, we got a lot of people who are into drafting and engineering and, you know, stuff like that. So if that's of interest, all I'm trying to do is make you aware of it so that you can go head over there and let Rhodia know that you want it to. All right, Carl asks on Facebook, I'm sort of new to the hobby. I own 3 pens now. Nice. Oh, sorry, Kari, not Carl. Sorry, the I kind of look like an L. Really sorry, Kari. Jeez. Oh, man, sorry about that. Okay, so anyway, I'm sort of new to the hobby. I own 3 pens now, and I was wondering if there is a good fountain pen history 101 resource out there that you could tell us about. Oh boy, that would be really cool for a Fountain Pen 101 video to cover the history. There's a lot of history, my goodness. Fountain pens have been around for like 150 years. There's so much history to cover. If you go check the Fountain Pen Network, they got a great resource for all kinds of random history things. They have a pen history subforum with all kinds of information on there, links to other sites and stuff like that. But also Richard Binder, he's a Nibmeister, been around in the business for a while. His website is a huge resource for all kinds of pen history. Just go look in his glossary and you can see all kinds of stuff. He's got all kinds of historical things. He's done a lot of vintage repair type related things, explains a lot about different filling mechanisms and all kinds of things like that. So his website is a great resource as well. It's richardspens.com. So check that out as well. I haven't gotten that much into like the vintage history side of things. I'm very much in the modern camp as far as fountain pens go. That's certainly something I appreciate and would like to learn more about eventually, but I'm pretty tied up in where I am right now with the modern stuff. But if you also know of any other resources besides what I just mentioned, love to hear about it in the comments on YouTube or on the blog. All right, next question from Ben K on Facebook. Which fountain pens would you recommend for drawing? Also, which ink would be the best for this application as well? Well, you can pretty much use whatever you want, Ben, but basically for straight lines, normal kind of stuff, most of the people that I know that draw a lot like Lamy Safaris, Pilot Metropolitans, some of the less expensive stuff. The reason people like Safaris is you can swap those nibs out. And also just the pen itself is sturdy, it's a workhorse, reliable, very popular amongst the artsy people. Noodlers Flex pens have actually become really popular as well because you can flip them over and get really fine lines, you can flex it out, get line variation. A lot of creativity you can get with them. You can do some cool stuff with washing and stuff with different inks. Brush pens, I know some people do that. That's getting more into painting than drawing, but a lot of people love brush pens, especially if you're drawing with one line and then trying to like pull out a color out of an ink and kind of do that kind of thing, more of an ink washing technique. You can do a lot of cool shading and stuff with a brush pen. Even if you just fill your brush pen with water or use like just a regular artist brush with water, you can kind of pull the ink, colors out of the ink. A lot of cool stuff you can do with that. I am not that artistic, so I've seen it done. We got some artsy people here at Goulet that I'm just like blown away by some of the stuff they do. Check out our Monday matchups too. We've had a lot of that kind of cool stuff done in the Monday matchups, but a lot of people like using the flex nibs too. And then you asked about ink. There's two different types of ink generally that people like to use for drawing. Ink that stays put and ink that you can do cool stuff with. So the ink that stays put, by far the most popular is platinum carbon black. That is like, especially because if you're doing washing and a lot of different stuff on the page, you like to use thicker paper. Generally thicker paper could be more coated, could be less prone to watercolor, that kind of, you don't want it to have buckle and all that, so you'd use like a watercolor paper or a heavy sketchbook paper or something like that. And some of the permanent inks from like Noodlers and maybe some Iron Galls and stuff take longer. They need more time to soak into the paper, and actually, Noodlers is cellulose reactive, so it has to absorb in there and actually bond to the cellulosic fibers to be able to be permanent. So the carbon ink is a pigment-based ink. So it goes on the page, it dries more on top of the paper, and then you can wash over top of it and it will not move. So that's why people love carbon black. And then other types of ink, a lot of people like the heavier saturated colors. A lot of Noodlers, a lot of Private Reserve, some of the diamines and stuff like that. Really concentrated inks do well with ink washing because you can pull a lot of color out of them as you're washing over them. So I don't have like one particular ink, but from my ink loving friends who do that kind of stuff, that's what I understand works really well for that purpose. All right, Eric O on Facebook says, what does a $1,000 pen have to offer versus a $150 pen versus a $25 pen? Okay, so essentially you're talking about why would you pay more for a more expensive pen? Okay, so think of pens like vehicles, right? A $25 pen is gonna be like a moped, right? A $150 pen is gonna be like Honda Accord or like, something Nissan Altima, like nice pen or nice car. A $1,000 pen would be like a Bentley, or a Ferrari or something like that. So some of it might deal with performance, but a lot of it is going to deal with some of the intangibles, the luxury, the appeal, the design, the marketing, the branding, the status, those types of things, especially when you get into going from $150 to a $1,000 pen. There's definitely some of that stuff that intangibles. But basically, when you're in the $25 range, you're going for function over form. You might have some fun colors and stuff like that, but the fit and finish is not going to be as nice. You're not going to have as consistent quality generally, especially when you talk about nib tuning and stuff like that. For a pen that inexpensive, you just can't get a lot of hand work on them because people just don't have the time to spend on that price of pen, like they do with a $150 pen. $150 pen, you're gonna get more into individual tuning and testing and, tweaking and that kind of stuff, nib smoothing, grinding, all that. you're going to have a person doing it instead of a machine generally, or at least in the final stages kind of testing it, you're going to have people that are doing that. When you're getting into, and a huge jump too between like those $25 and $150 pens, $150 where you start to get into gold nibs. Okay, price of gold is insane, it's very expensive, it's hard to work with, definitely takes more care to use. So just going with a gold nib pen, you're going to see that jump right up. Okay. Not to say that you can't have a steel nib in that price range, but generally you don't see gold nibs for less than around $150. You got some that are out there like the Pilot E95S, we have it like $136, so that one's like really pushing down. But generally you're going to be 140s, 150s on up for those gold nibs. And then you start to get in some cooler filling mechanisms too. You start getting some piston fillers instead of cartridge converter or an eyedropper. You know, and those kind of things. When you get into $1,000 pens, that's when you start to get into limited edition things. You know, you get into materials that are really hard to find or hard to work with. You know, you get into celluloids and like the OMOS, the cotton resins, and some really kind of unique things you might be dealing with. You know, pens that are made out of wood or that have you know, maquille and like artistry technique and engraving and enameling and abalone shell inlays and certain lacquers and stuff like that really require a lot more expertise, craftsmanship, handwork. You know, you get into pens that are made of sterling silver or, you know, things like that. So it gets a lot harder to justify the price as you get further up. You know, there's a thing called the law of diminishing returns that you've probably heard of, you know, and it's a curve that goes like this. And so basically the law of diminishing returns, if you got your x-axis here, this has to do with the this has to do with the performance of a pen, right, or the benefits that you would get. And then your y-axis is the cost. So what happens is, you know, when you're going from like a $4 pen to a $25 pen, the increase in price is not that significant on your y-axis, where the increase in performance could be quite significant. Depends on the pen, obviously, but it could be quite significant. For just a little bit more money, you're getting a lot more function. As you get further up the curve, you're having to pay a lot more in cost to get just a little bit more benefit, or maybe the benefits are not worth it to you. You know, if you don't care about it, whether a pen is celluloid versus acrylic acetate, then it's not going to be worth it for you to pay that price. You know, you might have a brand, like I'll use Platinum as an example. Platinum has their 3776 model pen that sells for around, you know, $200 or so. Gold nib, all that kind of stuff. You get that same pen made out of a celluloid or made out of something like that, price is going to double immediately just from having that different material. Same nib, same everything else. So if you don't care about that material, the price is a lot more significant, but it's not worth it to you. So that's when it gets into all these kinds of things. And then you also get into, you know, themes and the presentation, the box, the thought, the history, all that kind of stuff. That all plays into it. That kind of stuff, it's like, you know, it's like a fine set of golf clubs or fine wine or something like that. Unless you really have a refined palate, you're not going to appreciate that more expensive stuff. So unless you're, you know, like OMOS is a perfect example, because OMOS, they don't have a lower end stuff, you know. This Ogiva is like one of their less expensive pens they've ever done. But they have pens that are easily up into the thousands of dollars. But what you're getting with those is the whole theme, the design. You know, I've got a pen here like the 360. It's triangle shaped. You know, the fact that they have a triangle shaped pen, you can't just turn a triangle shaped pen on a machined lathe. You have to cut this thing by hand and polish it by hand. And there's so much handwork that goes into this. And if you're like, I don't care, I don't want a triangle pen, I want a circular pen. Well, there you go. Like, that's part of the reason why it may not be worth it for you to get a more expensive pen. But if you want a triangle shaped pen like this, you're gonna have to pay, because in order to get this shape, it requires a lot more work. So, you know, it's things like that. You have to really like be deep into this stuff and really understand what some of this is to actually appreciate some of these finer things. And then once you do, that's when you're in trouble, because you're going to go broke. But anyway, I'm at that point myself. Anyway, so next question here. I hope that covers it for you there. Jack T on Facebook says, "Hey Brian, Although I've been into the whole fountain pen thing for some years, it's only recently I've noticed how often I turn to my pens, ink, paper, etc. for de-stressing purposes. Do you think or hear much about the applied psychology of writing with fountain pens? Yeah, I do think about that a lot. I haven't done like a lot of scientific research. I wouldn't consider myself a nerd in that respect. Not that you are a nerd necessarily if you research a lot, but I think if you do research stuff like that a lot, it's okay to call yourself a nerd, just embrace it, you know. I research a lot of different things. My passion is more like business stuff. You know, I read a ton of nonfiction business books. And so that's what I spend a lot of my spare time doing. I'm more into the use of my products than I am about the research. So for me, pens are all about like sitting down and playing with them than I am about like researching the scientific details of them. So for that reason, I don't have like a lot of specific articles to give you on like the mind, you know, patterns and stuff that when people use pens, it does this and that and the other. I read articles here and there, so I know that they're out there. And especially given that the Department of Education has taken cursive out of schools as a requirement in recent years, and so a lot of people are kind of advocating for, well, you know, it helps students learn better, it helps improve your memory and so on, and that's all really cool. I wish I had better resources for you for that. It's just I haven't like done the work at this point to give you a lot of those resources. So if you know of like really interesting articles, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. But for me, I know like I've certainly read things about the fact that when you write something down, it does help your memory. It fires more synapses in your brain. I'm a musician, you know, I grew up playing a lot of different instruments, and I know, especially when you're playing an instrument, like I played wind instruments, you know, so you're reading music, you're thinking about your fingering, your breathing techniques and all that kind of stuff. You're using like 90% of the different parts of your brain when you're actually playing an instrument. Now, granted, you're not dealing with like the whole wind and all that kind of stuff, but when you're writing, it's the same kind of thing. It is an instrument. You know, you have hand-eye coordination, you're thinking about the letters, you're also thinking about what you're trying to say, you're forming sentences and your grammar, you're also, you know, holding the pen at certain angles and thinking about that. So you're using a lot of different things in your brain, much more so than just typing, right? I know I've read things about like how writing with a pen uses a lot more of your mind than when you're typing. Typing is better for stream of consciousness, just kind of getting thoughts out there because you can flow faster and just get more out. You're gonna have to edit it like crazy. Writing slows you down physically, so your brain works a lot more when you're handwriting than it does when, well, I shouldn't say it works more, but you're doing more work to form what you're saying in your brain when you're handwriting than when you're typing. Which is why when you see people on forums and Twitter and stuff like that, a lot of the stuff you hear, you're like, what are you saying? You know, because they're not thinking about it as deeply as if they were writing it by hand. Anyway, so did I cover everything I wanted to say there? Yeah. Yeah, so de-stressing purposes though, I mean, me personally, that's a lot of what I use it for. I mean, I love to use pens just for like my daily to-do list and kind of as I write things down. But for me, like it's really nice and rewarding to like sit down. I mean, my life is pretty crazy. Like I'm running this business. You know, we got, you know, 25, 26 people here, and it's crazy just the amount of stuff that goes on here every day. I'm on Twitter all the time, you know, I'm texting with my wife all the time, even though we're across the building, you know, just there's so much going on. I have two young kids, and there's a lot to manage in my life. But for me, it's very enjoyable to just sit down. Like, I can't even tell you, it's not even as often I get to do that as I would like, but to sit down with a nice paper and a nice pen that I love using with an ink, and I get to ink it up and write with it. Like it puts me in a whole different world. And I know you experience the same thing yourself, but like really just like tangibly getting to experience that, fill the pen, feeling the nib on the page, like watching the ink flow out, picking a color that really like speaks to the mood that you're in right at that time. and just, you know, getting to experience that. Like, it's just not the same typing. You know, when I'm typing and stuff, like my fat fingers are always double hitting things and hitting. I'm always frustrated, you know, as I'm typing stuff out because it's all misspelled things and it's like, fine, whatever, you know. But when I'm handwriting, it's a whole different experience. Like, it definitely changes my mood tremendously when I'm sitting down and writing something with a pen, as opposed to typing or tweeting or whatever, or even like speaking into a voice, you know, mail, whatever thing. And it's very different. All that other stuff is just purely, you know, utility. But the fountain pen, that's part of the reason I love it the most, and what drew me the most into the fountain pen community when I first started to experience it. Like, when I went to the DC Pen Show in 2009, that was my first kind of experience with fountain pens in really any real capacity. And I went there and I was just like, whoa, there's this community of people that are really into this thing, and not a single person here has to use a fountain pen. I mean, they may like have to, like romantically, just because they love it, but you know, functionally, no one has to use a fountain pen anymore. It is not a tool of utility in terms of being able to communicate. There's not like that's the only form of communication. You know, 60 years ago, sure, the fountain pen was the tool of communication. You had typewriters and you had fountain pens or pencils, and that was pretty much it. But aside from that, you know, since the ballpoint came out and now you got computers and all this stuff, you know, fountain pens are, you know, I'll call it, they are functionally obsolete in terms of modern communication, but they are not for that purpose. They are for a very different purpose, which is why I love the fountain pen community, because it's all people that use it because they love it. So it's the passion. It's like a passion filter. All the people who don't want to deal with it and get frustrated about having to clean out their pen and stuff like that, like, they just don't stick around in this hobby. So they all get weeded out, you know, or they, you know, I'll talk to somebody and I'll show them a fountain pen, and, you know, I'll get a lame excuse like, oh, I lose expensive pens, or, you know, oh, I had a pen like that once and I just couldn't deal with it, or, you know, that kind of thing. Usually it's the losing it thing. People, that's like the number one excuse that I get whenever I tell people like, oh yeah, I do fountain pens. And it's like immediately they have to say like, oh, I can't handle nice pens because I lose them. It's like they have to be defensive about it. I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, I know I'm weird because I like fountain pens. I'm not trying to sell you. I'm not trying to sell you on fountain pens. Like, chill out. You know, it's funny because like people of all statuses too will do that. You know, it's kind of, I guess it's kind of like wine. Like if you go to a restaurant, I know Gary Vee talks about this a lot. Like people, you know, running like billion-dollar businesses, but then we go to a restaurant and get a wine list, they like freak out because they don't know what to do. Same thing with fountain pens. Like people who are very adept, very capable people, like you hand them a fountain pen and they're like, I don't know what to do with this, you know, but it's really not that complicated. That's where like I know I'm totally derailing the question here, but like that's where for me, I love to kind of introduce what I do to people and tell them like, oh yeah, I'm into fountain pens, and because it's like I either get one of two reactions. I either get people that are like, oh really? That's cool. I'd love to. I had my grandfather have one. I've always been interested, you know. And then I'm like, game on. Here's a pen. Try it out. Boom, boom, boom. Let me show you this thing. Here, go to my blog. Check out Fountain Pen 101. And then it's like they're off and running, you know. But they're either like in that direction or the other one. They're like, oh, gosh, you know, I had a pen once and I lost it, and I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Like, totally fine. Just here, use it. Here's your G2. You know, just take that, and you know, I'll stick with my fountain pens. You know, but anyway. So wow, total derailment there, but a lot of fun. Thanks for that question, Jack. All right, Kevin L. Is there any going back to a pen from your past once it leaves your collection, no matter how it left? The only reason that I answered this question, Kevin, I know that most. I don't know about most people, but a lot of people out there will use pens. If they find out they really don't like it, they'll sell it off, give it to somebody, whatever, kind of clear it out of their collection. That is not me. I have a bit of a pen problem. I'm kind of a hoarder. It's pretty bad. Like, I hoard ink samples, I hoard pens, and it does not help that I'm running this company, right? So like, I've got old Noodlers pens that you maybe have never even seen before. I hang on to everything because I think it's so fascinating and interesting, and I feel like, you know, for myself, I love to like collect. I guess I'm like neurotic in that way. Like, I just don't want to get rid of any of this pen stuff. And so my office is just filled like with, it's off to the side here, but it's filled with bins of stuff. Wow, what the heck? Let me show you. And I've never really shown much of this, but let me just spin the tripod around here for a second. So over here, I've got like, you know, a shelf with like bins and bins of stuff, of old cartridges and paper samples and stuff. And then over here, you know, I've got, you know, more stuff over here. You like that little bicycle thing with the ride on there. So I've got that. I've got my little treadmill, my little makeshift treadmill, walking treadmill there. But anyway, so, oh gosh, I gotta make sure I get this back in the right place. So that's kind of my problem, is I hoard everything. And you've seen me in past Q&As if you've been watching them. I have like tons of Monteverde cases filled with pens, and I just never get rid of anything. So I really can't answer your question because I've never really had anything that's left my collection. My collection just kind of keeps on growing. My name is Brian, and I have a pen problem. But, you know, I've had pens that I've carried in my store that I've dropped, that I've brought back. Like Kaweco, I did that. I dropped Kaweco, they changed distributors, we brought it back. And so I'm not like opposed, if it's a good pen and I like it and I want to carry it, I'm not opposed to dropping it for whatever logistical reasons and then bringing it back, if that's your question. But for me, I don't have like any personal like resentment against any brand or anything like that. So if I, you know, depending I guess on the situation, if it was like a quality issue, that would be a different story, you know, but that's kind of my situation. If it's just a matter of preference, man, you know, like my preferences change. I've got pens that I've used and I was like, not really that into it. Pick it up a year later and I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. You know, see, just your preferences change. All right, Alex S. on Facebook. How do you rectify a misbehaved ink? I have Noodlers Bad Blue Heron, and no matter what pen I put it in, the nib creep is so bad that it leaks all over the section. I've tried diluting the ink with a small amount of water, and it still has leaky issues. I know it's not the pen, as I've had this ink in other pens and other inks, and this particular pen, Noodlers Ahab, and other inks don't leak. Any advice is appreciated. Okay, yeah, I don't think it's just your pen. I think probably it's a pen-ink combination. That ink that you're talking about, Bad Blue Heron, that's an extremely wet ink. Huge flow. It's very, very permanent, but it's a very, very wet flowing ink. I would say probably that ink is just not for you. If you're using it in your pens and it's just not working out, then it's probably not the right thing. There's not really a lot you can do to like make it right drier, you know, unless you unscrew the cap and let some of the water evaporate out of there, you know, kind of, you know, increase the saturation if you know, like, I don't know. I don't really know what to do to make that any better. It's definitely a combination of your pen and your ink together. The Ahab is a very wet pen with a big open feed for that flex to allow the proper flow. So that in combination with a really wet ink like that, I can totally see how that would creep like crazy. And especially if you're carrying it around, like that's one thing you didn't talk about there, Alex, but I would say that might be something to look at. I'm not gonna make any assumptions like you're shaking your pens too much or something like that, but that is something to consider. How you're carrying your pens, or if you're transporting them in any way. If they are transported, keeping them nib up will give you the best chance of not having leaking issues. If you're carrying them nib down or sideways, or like you're laying them in a backpack or you know, pocket or purse or whatever your situation is, then if it's being like shaken back and forth like this, that can help exacerbate ink coming out like crazy. So try and keep them nib up would be my suggestion. Me personally, I've got a backpack that I keep my pens in here that I use, and I have like a 10 pen case that I keep in the front that's always pointed nib up. So that for me always keeps it easy. And I've also got like pockets inside here where it's got all kinds of junk, but I'll keep like little, you know, slips where the pen is also keeping straight up. So that's my way that I do it, that I still carry it around, transport them every day, but I never have leaking issues because of the way I transport my pens. So that's really all I can say given your situation. You know, use a different ink would have to be my only answer. I'm sorry, that's the best that I have. Matt S. on Facebook, is there a good way to prime a Platinum Preppy eyedropper fill that will make it easier to get more stubborn inks like Noodler's Rome Burning to start flowing smoothly, or should I be resigned to never getting a clean comparison writing sample for this ink? Okay, Matt, your original question was really long. I kind of paraphrased it there in case you didn't notice. So I would say for the preppy, okay, ink it up, let it sit there for a minute or two. You know, when you're using something like an eyedropper, you can't force ink down. You're essentially, it's kind of like when you're using a pen that's a cartridge too. It's the same kind of situation. You gotta let it sit there, let the capillary action of the ink move it through the feed. You can't just, you know, stick a cartridge in or fill up an eyedropper and expect it to write immediately. It's not going to happen because it's got to take time to work its way through. It's got to go through the feed channel, start filling in the fins, and then work its way up to the nib, and it takes a little bit of time to do that. When you're doing something like an eyedropper, it's like I said, that same concept as a cartridge, because normally when you're using a fountain pen, if you have a converter and you are trying to fill the pen, you're filling it through the feed, and then your ink is up here, your feed is already filled with ink. But when you're going with an eyedropper or a cartridge, then what's happening is you're putting the ink up here, but this is all still dry in here, so it's gonna have to take time to work its way down. Now there's a couple ways that you can essentially move that along. If you had a converter, like say for example you had a converter, you know, like so, this is not the converter that fits this pen, but this is for demonstration purposes. I also don't have a nib on my Lamy right here, so whatever, terrible demonstration, but when you're using a converter, you can fill, you know, your converter directly from the bottle and then stick it on your pen, but then you can use your piston and you can force it down through the feed. That helps kind of prime it up. That's what you referred to. You can't do that with an eyedropper though. So you don't have the converter to be able to do that, but for an eyedropper, what you do, and I learned about this from Richard Binder's nib smoothing workshop actually, the correct way to help to assist ink to go down through your feed, if you don't want to just leave it sitting there for a couple of minutes, is to hold it in your hand as if you're writing it normally, and then to take your hand, I think I might be a little out of frame here, but to take your hand, I'll use this as a table surface, and hold the nib so that it's up off, plenty off the paper, and then just take and tap your hand, you know, knocking it onto the table. And that will help the ink to kind of like work its way down through the feed. Do that a few times. And then you can kind of like dab the nib on the page, or you can do that a few times until a little bit of ink actually flicks out. Then you know the thing is primed up and good to go. You can do that with a cartridge or with an eyedropper pen. So that's one thing that can definitely help. The other thing that you can do if the ink is kind of working its way down, but it's just not quite there, you know, you can see that it's in the feed, but it's just not coming down through the nib. You can take a paper towel, a little piece of paper towel, and you can touch it to the top of the nib and kind of use the wicking action on the paper towel to help to kind of coax the ink out of that pen. Okay? Doing okay on time. All right, hopefully that helps you out. Matt, Ben W on Facebook. I'm totally not going to get through all these questions, but we'll try. Something that initially kept me away from fountain pens was a rumor I'd heard about once you use a pen, the nib is forever altered. What this meant was that if someone else used your pen, it would ruin the nib. Could you address this and possibly where the idea originated? Thank you. I have to laugh whenever I hear this because I heard the same thing when I first got into fountain pens. It's kind of like an old urban legend, right? I don't know exactly where it originates. I really don't. I don't hear about it quite as much, you know, these days as I did when I was first getting into the hobby, but maybe that's just because I'm not spending as much time in the kinds of threads where, you know, people are asking those kinds of questions. But basically, it's a lie, okay? I mean, think about it. You've got a pen, it's got a nib. Even if it's a gold nib, gold is a softer nib than stainless steel, but these nibs are made to be used for decades, okay? They are held up to writing with for a very long period of time. If you really think that handing someone a pen and having them sign their name, unless they're doing something really wrong, if you think that just having them sign their name is going to forever change the fundamental structure of that nib, that's insane. Like, how could you possibly make that argument in terms of physics? Now, what I will say is that you, as the user, get used to writing with your pen a certain way. Over a long period of time, a year or 2 or 5, depending on how much you're using that one individual pen and depending on what type of metal the nib is made out of, that pen can change over time to kind of adapt to the rotation, the writing pressure, and the stuff like that that you use. A good example for me I have my blue Pilot Custom 74 that I talk about way too much. It was my first gold nib pen that I used personally. And this pen now writes more like a broad because I have a very heavy hand. This nib is very springy. I've written with it many, many, many times. And I have just, you know, over time, I have almost subconsciously, but basically purposefully flexed this thing out to the point where if I grabbed a new medium Custom 74 off the shelf back there, it would write finer than this one that I've been using, because that's how I personally have broken in this nib. And it took about a year for me to get to that point using this pen fairly exclusively. And so it's something that takes a lot of time. But to say that you're gonna ruin a nib with even moderately normal use by letting somebody borrow it, that is just not true. I'm sorry. It just does not make sense. Now, I will say that it is certainly possible for you to hand this pen to somebody who has no idea what they're doing, and they can ruin your nib, even writing something as short as their signature. That is possible, you know, but it's also possible for somebody to crash your car moving it across the parking lot. Is it likely? Probably not. You know, just because someone could wreck your car by driving it doesn't mean that you should never let anyone borrow your car because they're going to wreck it. It's, you know, it's the same kind of thing with a fountain pen. You know, if you've got somebody that wants to use your fountain pen, give them a little bit of education if they've never used it before. Tell them how to hold it. You'd be amazed the number of people that I hand a pen to and they go and flip this nib upside down and try to start writing with it, you know. But you just hand it to them and say, okay, you want the nib, the shiny surface to be up. You want to hold it about a 45-degree angle, and you don't want to write with a lot of pressure. You know, you want to just kind of let the pen write itself. You know, a good writing fountain pen, you should be able to take and, you know, just have the weight of the pen itself write, you know, with the pressure that it has. You don't have to press down. Just that amount of education for people, that 10 seconds that I took, is really all you need to guarantee, well, more or less guarantee that they're not going to ruin your nib by writing with it a little bit. But again, I have no idea where that originated. Probably it originated from people who had expensive pens that didn't want to loan them out to people. So they said, no, I can't do that. This is personal to me. Or it might have been wrapped up in some kind of marketing thing where, you know, oh, if our fountain pen nib will conform to your writing thing, you know, let's get real, okay? No, that's not really happening. We're talking about metal here. Metal is not that adaptable, okay? It's pretty durable. So if you are using a pen and it feels different to you than some other pen, the difference is you, probably not the pen. You know, there's certainly physical characteristics that can be different, but I guarantee you get a pen like a Lamy 2000 that's ground a little bit differently than most other pens. You use that thing for a month and all of a sudden it feels really great to write with. That pen hasn't really changed. You have changed. You have gotten used to seeing how that pen writes and have adapted your own writing style. But a very interesting question, and something I hear about a good amount. But again, it's kind of an urban legend. All right, I'm doing a terrible job of keeping concise. But here we go. Next one. Whitney B on Facebook. How does using a gold nib make writing so much smoother when there is some other alloy used as the tipping material? I know it works, I just don't understand how. It's a good question. So yes, you are correct. When you're using a fountain pen, most fountain pens will have some kind of tipping material on the tip itself. It's usually some kind of iridium alloy. It's a metal that's harder even than stainless steel. The reason is that is what is actually doing all of the writing. Paper at the very granular level, if you look at it on a microscope, it's actually very rough. It is not a smooth surface. So there's a lot of friction that's created when you're dragging this thing across the page, and that is going to wear down the metal over time. If you have an untipped nib, an untipped gold nib is going to wear down fairly fast because gold's a pretty soft metal. An untipped stainless steel nib might last you a year before it really starts to visibly wear down. With using these harder alloys, it's going to be years and years and years and years. Like probably a decade or more of heavy use before you'd see any kind of real wear on that alloy. So yeah, if that's the thing, if that's what's actually touching the page, why does it matter whether you have a steel or a gold nib? Well, a lot of people would argue it doesn't really matter that much, especially if you have some gold nibs out there are not that soft. They're actually rather stiff. So what difference does it really make? Well, if you're writing with a pen and you can't tell the difference, don't get a gold nib, you know? I'm not of the camp that you have to get a gold nib to have a nice writing experience. I have plenty of my favorite pens are stainless steel nibs, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. And especially some pens, you look at the price of gold, it's not worth it. However, some nibs that have a lot of springiness to them, a lot of that is hard to get with stainless steel. You know, stainless steel in and of itself is a harder metal than gold. So gold nibs themselves tend to be more softer, they tend to be a little springier, and essentially what's happening, even though the tip itself is the same, the nib is bending a little bit more. So think about it like a car, okay? Your tires would be the tipping material, right? That's what's actually touching the road. The tipping material is what's actually touching the page. But when you have shocks on your car, those shocks are going to help absorb the bumps that you're going to feel. That's what's happening with a gold nib versus a really, really stiff stainless steel nib, okay? And now I just realized that my battery pack's about to die, so I have reached the end of my question. Dang it! I only got through 12 questions? Jeez, Brian. Okay, well, I got a few other good ones, but won't have time to get to them today. Be sure to hit me up on Twitter, _Goulet_ on Twitter, and if you have any other questions that you want to answer for next week, hit me up on Facebook, YouTube, in the comments, on the blog, or you can email gouletq@gouletpens.com. Appreciate you watching this time. If you're on the audio podcast, you know, I'd love to know what you think. Maybe leave me a rating or something on iTunes. That'd be cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Really didn't get as many questions as I thought. Sorry about that, but that's okay. Still got a good solid hour of entertainment in here. So hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, this video. And as always, write on.